Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fascinating topic. In this panel, with these very distinguished guests that we have, we're going to explore a bit more deeply this link between business, the arts, photography, and its impact that it has on the world. Clearly, it's a very, very big issue, but I'm very, very glad that on this stage we have a wealth of experience to help us out make sense and go a bit deeper into the way that the art can impact the way business impacts the world. So I asked my guests to present themselves, to tell us a bit about their story, but indeed to tell us about how through their own lens, if you like, see the way that the arts can impact business. So maybe we start with Aidan, then Edmund, and then back to Hans. So tell us a bit about your own experience and how can arts be used, in a sense, to influence the way that business impacts the world.
Sure. So I've been working in the photographic industry for 145 years. And during that time, I've had the privilege to work with some of the finest photographers in the world. And it's always a great privilege to work with them. And in 2016, I remember as all of the support for the very important work they were doing was falling away because the editorial market was losing its budgets and losing the finance. Obviously, as an agent looking after these photographers, I had to think of a way that we could actually take their skill sets and look at somewhere else that they could get their funding. So we launched an agency specifically to cater to the needs of amplifying social impact initiatives. And it really came from an article I read by Sir Martin Sorrell, who's, many of you know, is the founder and CEO of the WPP, the world's largest advertising group. And it was a long end-of-year report article, but at the end of it, it said, and I'll never forget, doing good is good for business. And as I looked into it more and I was looking at the social impact initiatives of many, many brands, I was looking at how they really disseminate that. How do they get that message out to the public that they're doing these great things? And to be frank, quite often they just weren't really doing anything that was impactful because there was lots of data there, but there was nothing visual that would draw people in. And I think, you know, that just this evening when we saw the photograph from Tiananmen, everybody in the room knows exactly what that is about. And it's because that image can say so much, one picture. But the other thing we know is that when we look at all this great social impact, and you know, we were looking at Lady Agnes and Brent's story that he did, it's people who make stories. It's the people who benefit from these malaria drugs, from all of these social impact initiatives. It's their stories that actually resonate more than the data. And so that's why we set up the agency.
Right, so there's no question that it's a very powerful way. And as you said, it's one thing to show bar charts and pie charts. It's quite another to show a picture. So, Aidan, do you have any personal experiences, a personal example perhaps, where you see this power of the storytelling, the power of an image, if you like, that really changed the way perhaps the world was seeing business, or perhaps the way that business could change the world, basically? Any personal examples in that respect?
Well, I mean, there's one image, Brent Sturton, as you go through the exhibition later, you'll see he actually has two bodies of work here. But Brent once took a photograph of a gorilla being carried out of the, silverback gorilla being carried out of the jungle. And it became one of the most iconic wildlife images, you know, ever. And to date, I think it's raised over $53 million in funding for projects to help the silverbacks in Virunga. So one image, $53 million and counting. So the power of imagery, in the picture you saw from Tiananmen, and we recently did a body of work for a pharmaceutical company about bipolar sufferers and the issues they faced. And what started out as a series of environmental portraits about these people, you know, suffered from this condition, actually went on to become an award-winning film. And through social media channels and through an influencer of a Hollywood star who has bipolar herself, they raised not only millions of dollars, but they connected with so many people And they learned about a demographic that they knew, but this confirmed it, that most of the people that were reacting to this story were first-year college students in the States. And it turns out that that's when it's more likely to manifest itself because of the stresses of being away from home, being independent, and being at college. And so they worked out this demographic, and because of the social media channels that wanted to interact, they suddenly had all of this amazing data. So those projects, and there are many I could go on and tell you, like Lady Agnes out there, it's because it resonates with people. That we hear about this is an emotional currency, and there's corporate social responsibility. That's great, but you have to be able to create a visual narrative that helps people connect with it.
It's almost an apparent paradox, right? Because as you said, once you see the image, when it really resonates with you, you really have the emotional reaction. Yet you said that when you set up the agency, you realized a number of companies were actually not doing it. So in your experience, especially as an agency, what's the obstacle? Why are they not doing it? What are some of the reasons that maybe they're constrained from doing it, or is it lack of awareness that they're not doing it? What are some of those reasons?
I think quite often it's an education. It's showing how just a photograph taken by one of your staff on the ground with an iPhone and put on the landing page of your website is not the same as getting one of our photographers like Toby, who also has an exhibition here. It's the power of that narrative, and there are very, very few people who do it well. Pascal, clearly, is one of the elite, and they are an elite group. And that visual narrative is the engine that really pulls people in and really, makes them feel engaged with it. And as we know, this generation and the next generation that's coming along, they demand to know the brands that they are going to associate with, and the shoes they're going to buy, and the banks they're going to work with. They need to know that there's sustainability at the heart of what they're doing. There's care about the environment. And the way to do that is to engage with them emotionally, and visual narratives are the better way to do that than just statistics and achievements through fundraising and so on. It's that engagement.
It's rather interesting to consider that sometimes, of course, you can portray responsibility, but oftentimes you can also portray irresponsibility by corporates, and that can be equally powerful. But we'll return to that because in a bit, because I also want to go now to Edmund and share your experience and what you do at Ishkar.
So just 2 weeks after leaving university, I went to a place where we all have a very strong image of our mind, what it's like. And that place was Afghanistan. And I went there expecting to find a place that was full of deserts, full of poppy fields, full of scenes of explosions and terrorist attacks. And I was very surprised by what I found. I was working for an organization called Turquoise Mountain, which was regenerating the old city of Kabul. And actually, the things that we're engaged with on a daily basis had nothing to do with those elements of Afghanistan, which are very true, but they are not the dominant things in people's lives there. Often the dominant things in people's lives are day-to-day interactions, or in our case, we were working with artisans, and they are energetic, ambitious, talented entrepreneurs, and they were living those lives like talented entrepreneurs live them in London and other major cities. So that was my experience. And I lived in Afghanistan for 3 years. And towards the end of my time there, the Paris attacks happened. And the reaction to the Paris attacks was very interesting. People kept on asking me why I was living in a place like Afghanistan, which was so dangerous. It really raised a lot of emotional reactions amongst people. And I felt that I needed to bring a bit of the Afghanistan that I knew to people around the world. And the best way that I could think of bringing the beautiful side of Afghanistan, the positive side of Afghanistan, was by bringing its craftsmanship here, which is one of the greatest things it does. So we actually traveled to other war-torn countries, southern Syria and northern Mali as well, to find crafts which would really effectively show the beautiful side to these war-torn countries that we don't often hear about. And that's what a lot of there's a collection of images from Turquoise Mountain on display. And what I love about those images is what they capture is pride. They don't capture victimhood or anything like that. And I think that's what art does really, really powerfully, is it captures things which news articles can't. And they're powerful images that stay with you.
Mm-hmm. And can you share with us a bit, how do you, you mentioned that you bring the art and the craftsmanship from Afghanistan to places like London and Paris, and you mentioned that you're breaking into the US market as well. Can you talk to us a bit more about how do you bring out the stories of the people that produce these pieces, and how are you able to, how does that, the artistic aspect essentially allow you to introduce those people to the world and perhaps fight the perceptions, mostly wrong perceptions that you just said. So how do we actually do this through Ishkar?
Well, we actually have a shop in a place called the Koppel Project, which is just about 100 meters away from LBS. So do have a look how we do it. But the key way we do it online is for every product you see on our webpage, if you scroll down just one thing, there's a story about the person who made it and the place where they made it, and a little video about them making it. And that's really amazing because one of our bestsellers is hand-blown glass. And our glasses come from a mud brick workshop in Western Afghanistan. The workshop hasn't changed its look in 2,000 years. They found a great formula. It's got a hole in the roof to let the smoke out from the mud brick kiln. And in the workshop next to the place where the glassblower does his thing, there is a sesame seed oil factory where a camel strapped to an enormous log goes around a huge pestle grinding sesame seed into oil. And that is extraordinary to think that those glasses that we see on Baker Street have come all the way from that tiny little mud brick workshop in Western Afghanistan. And so we try and do that through photographs mainly, and also little videos. Mm-hmm.
So people often say that the art is a universal language, right? And although we speak kind of the one half of the story, which is how perhaps the markets or the people that you sell these pieces react, what has been I'm pretty sure you have met a lot of these craftsmen, as you just described. What has been the emotional and the reaction of those people when you go and you meet them and you say, we would like to sell these pieces abroad, right? What's the reaction from that side of the spectrum?
To be honest, not a particular reaction at all. I mean they just see it as a business opportunity. There's no emotional, there's no feeling of, wow, my glasses are in London. They don't care. What they care about is that someone's just placed the largest order their business has had for a long time. That's all that the focus is. So there's no emotional, nothing emotional going on at all. Mainly haggling. That's
Great.
Great.
So I would like to go back to Hans. Hans, you gave us a really insightful presentation about the whole malaria initiative. But I've seen from your website, we have seen from the exhibition as well, that art has played, and photography in particular, has played a significant role in this as well. So I was wondering if you can share with us the extent to which and the ways in which the arts have helped in spreading the message, raising perhaps awareness about the initiative that you have at Novartis, and any other ways. I mean, you very briefly talked about the illustration on the very packaging of these drugs, trying to get the people to use it the right way. Is there any other ways that you have experienced this kind of transmitting the message, communicating the message in a way that is effective through the arts, whether it's building partnerships or transmitting instructions on how to use the drug?
Yeah. So what we feel is that malaria patients don't really have as much a voice as, for example, patients living with HIV/AIDS have. They're very strong patient advocates. So what we decided, we wanted to give the patients, the malaria patients, wanted to give them not a voice, but maybe a visual, a face. So indeed, many of our materials that we indeed post on websites or in printed matter, they tell the story of a patient, a healthcare worker, a nurse, a caregiver, a pharmacist, etc. So those images play a very important role, and for us as a company, for our associates, for those who are directly involved with the fight against malaria, but also those that are not so directly involved, but for whom, let's say, the stories about malaria really get to life when they see patients. So what we actually have developed is for very special occasions, a photo book with pictures from a photographer called Mark Tushman. So that is a book that we really reserve for special guests or special occasions that tells them the story of malaria.
So Aidan, how can we do more of this, right? You mentioned before education. How can we help spread the word, if you like, that of the power of the arts to really influence the way that business impacts the world? You mentioned education before. Would you like to elaborate a bit more? What are the enabling mechanisms here? Are we lacking institutions that would allow us to scale this up even more and really have that impact that perhaps other ways don't have, and or the reach that other ways do not have about those issues?
I think we're at this inflection point now where big brands and corporations realize they need to be doing something. They need to be making it clear to the client base and the general public that they are doing good things, and they are. But they're not making it broad enough. The stories that we hear tonight, are very, very special stories. And there are so many different channels now, whereas it used to be quite confined. Now with social media channels and using influencers, you can really get those stories out there. And I think it's to be honest, it's being brave. Mm-hmm. When I go and I stand in front of a brand and I say to them, look, I think something you're doing is absolutely extraordinary, but nobody knows about it. Allow me to take one of our great storytellers and help tell that story, mm-hmm. and you just watch and see what the engagement is like. And I think, one of the keys to that is authenticity. Mm-hmm. And that's where the photographers and filmmakers that I represent come in, because of course they're all incredibly ethical because they're photojournalists. And I saw a wonderful quote the other day that basically said, if you do something just for show, eventually it will. And sometimes brands don't understand that the public are very discerning, and they're not going to be fooled. They'll know whether you're telling a true story. And the best way to tell a true story is to use storytellers like the people we represent. So it's getting those personal messages out there. All of the initiatives that are out there, these massive brands who are doing so well. They're spending small fortunes helping people, but they always go for the headlines and they don't drill it down to the actual people who are benefiting from it, that you can relate to.
I think you brought up a really fascinating and a difficult issue, but I'm going to ask you anyway, which is this problem of this challenge of authenticity, right? Because if anything, a lot of brands around the world these days do have the propensity to greenwash, right? To present an image that, as you said, it's not true, it's not genuine, it's not part really of their identity, but they just do it for the PR. Mm-hmm. So you as an agent, and you as you speak to so many brands, what does your sensor look like? In other words, what kind of criteria do you apply to be able to tell this is an authentic story versus this is a made up story, and they're approaching me because perhaps they want to tell a story that is just PR? How do you make that distinction? So you don't need to reference brands, but
I'm not going to mention names, but there is an actual discussion I'm having at the moment, and it is quite hard because traditionally, brands, if they're advertising what they are doing to a large audience, they want to see their product in it. I mean, if it's Canon, they want the photographer to be shooting Canon, or they want them to go through it. If it's a car manufacturer. And the quantum leap is for me to be able to go in and sit in front of this group of marketeers and brand managers and say, look, if you support a body of work, the ethical journalistic documentary body of work by Brent Sturton, and you do not put your fingerprints on that, so it can't have your brand, you can't tell us what to do, but it's going to be an ethical piece of documentary film or journalism, that will stand on its own, but it will be presented by your brand. So your association, when Brent Sturton or Toby Smith or Tom Stoddard or Lindsay Addario wins an award with that work, and it gets Time Magazine, the National Geographic, you have the halo effect because you're associated with it. And we can also do a far more branded version of it, but to actually support an ethical piece of journalism is now available to you, because it's no longer possible, very rare, that editorial publications have the funding to send Brent Sturton to Virunga for 3 months. But a car manufacturer can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the point. So it's keeping the true ethical nature of journalism, but it's a confluence of concern, photography, and commerce. There are a lot of C's in that, by the way.
It's interesting because if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying it's sort of a disciplinary mechanism, right? The art is bringing to the photojournalism in this case is bringing the ethical lens, right? Because a lens cannot lie in that way, in that way, right? So if the story is not authentic, if the brand, the identity is not authentic, then it's just not going to fly. So it's a disciplinary and a selection mechanism in its way to distinguish between the two. Does that resonate, Hans, with the kind of the collaborations you had with the people that photographed the experience? The people that you have collaborated for the illustrations, the people that you have built partnerships with, is that something that you felt that you had to? I mean, of course you were authentic, you have developed the drug, but kind of transfer that authenticity through these collaborations?
Yeah, definitely. You want to display something that doesn't really, let's say, show something about the company, because it's not about the company, it's about the customers. It's about those who are actually suffering. And so indeed this packaging that I just had up there, we had in mind that the mothers or the children would need to use this in the right way. So we set out with social anthropologists to go into rural areas and to actually collect people from the village, across, under the mango tree. And they started to explain, and there was this graphic artist there to start sketching, and then one would try and show that picture to the people from the village. Would they understand it? And if not, it would be redrawn. It would be kind of tweaked, etc. So until you got to a point that indeed people get the message through the imagery that is produced there on site, and so that's kind of a vehicle that we felt was important. Another example actually is our annual reports, our corporate annual reports. They are filled with pictures, and so we believe that actually that tells the human side of the story. We talk about medicines, we talk about illness, but if you can put pictures to this, it tells much more. And
just following on that thread, Edmund, I'm guessing that especially at the beginning, right, you might have faced some sort of skepticism or cynicism. I mean, who are you that will go bring artifacts and pieces from Afghanistan and sell them here? Or I'm guessing that in trying to penetrate the market, you had to tell in many ways an authentic story, a real story of the real people, right? And people don't always believe those stories easily. So to what extent did you face those challenges, and how did you deal with them, especially at the beginning of Ishkar?
Yeah. Well, we only work in places where there is absolutely no tourist industry. So there is no one, unless a few development workers and soldiers, who could go and check out our story about our Herat glass blower. So from a very early point, we've had to be really, really honest and strict with ourselves about telling authentic stories. But funnily enough, we haven't had that much questioning or suspicion about what we do. I think it's the way that we pitch our products. We don't pitch the ethical line of our products at all. And I hope if you went on our website, you would leave thinking, this is a business. This isn't a social enterprise. And the reason we do that is because we want people to buy because they like a product, because they want it, not because they feel they're doing good. And I think in some way, being honest like that has perhaps allayed some of that line of questioning.
Okay. Great. So we do have a couple of minutes left for sure, and I would like to open this up to the audience. If you have any questions or comments or anything that you want to ask our distinguished guests, by all means, please do so. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
What is going to be at this stage? What is LBS plans to do and the BDI plans to do in the upcoming months, years, in order to educate the next generation of leaders to the importance of visual communication?
That's a question for me. I was meant to be the moderator, right? Okay, so I think, so I've been at LBS for 9 years. I'm not going to take too much time to answer this question, but I think LBS, just by its location in London, whereas, it compared to the US and other locations, it is the center of responsible companies as well as responsible investments and sustainable and socially responsible markets. However, I think that the school itself is taking really gigantic steps going into what I would call the responsible business school direction and educating leaders in a way that is responsible in terms of how they run their businesses, how they run their careers, and their kind of impact they have in the world. And that's why I think in that frame, the Wheeler Institute is really a great initiative, and I think in many ways unique in terms of its kind. So the short answer, and we can go into the details because that wasn't intentionally my question, is that I think there's great things that are in the pipeline, and the great things are going to come out of LBS in the coming years. That's, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll pleasantly surprise you in the years to come. Any other questions? Yes, the lady there, if you can get the microphone. Yeah, if you could give us a second for the microphone. Yes, thank you.
I'm interested in this, the concept of the confluence between the business and the authenticity of photojournalism, and how the challenges, how you marry these concepts. Because we are in a world that we are all more visually educated, better informed. It's a more diverse world, which further reach social media allow us, to know about all different parts of the world. So there is a kind of awareness about ethicality. And then you have brands that will be willing to maybe support courses, which, they are very ethical and is very relevant because they raise awareness on the issues that they are being involved. But then you have sort of your customers, your client base, that could actually react against it. So without naming brands, we know, for example, a brand supporting the Tate with a great deal of money, and culturally it's all very welcoming, maybe for all of us Londoners, because we benefit from these incredible, amazing exhibitions that this brand has been supporting. But then there is this kind of backlash of a wider audience that they are saying, well, we don't really feel that it's ethical for culture to be marrying with this brand, when actually what this brand is doing in certain parts of the world could be challenging to our ideas. So for me, it's very interesting. I always like the whole idea of this confluence, but we are being challenged by these kind of ethical issues more and more. So how do you navigate this, and how you can see the road ahead of what could actually happen?
So what we do is we just full disclosure, Monica and I know each other very well. We worked at the Sunday Times together. We look at it in a very editorial way. So we look at a brand, we look at their social impact initiatives, we look at what they're doing and what they have done, but then we drill down and we drill down until we find a story within that story. And we say, you did this. In this case, it was Lady Agnes, but this is something that your company has done. It has done something that is remarkable and is praiseworthy. But we had to dig all the way down to find it. Why don't you let us take that story, amplify it, so we can show that your efforts actually did some good, and this is the person who actually benefited from it, or a group of people, or a community that benefited from that action. So it's not meant to be in any way political. It's just looking at existing stories or existing social impact initiatives. It could be a car manufacturer who's decided that they're only going to make electric engines from now on because they want to reduce their carbon footprint. So there's a story there. What's the story? How is that impacting real people? And what is that going to do over the next 10 years? So we look at it very journalistically, very editorially, and then pitch them with a story.
Right. So I think we have time for one more question, perhaps. Lady here at the front.
Hi, that was an amazing panel discussion. Thank you very much to all of you. It's a completely new topic for me, pretty much, so absolutely fascinating. My question is really, it's about responsible businesses, about your perceptions. I'm a big believer about the millennial generation, the shift of dynamic and thought and vision, and that will change society, and it will change over the next sort of 10 to 20 years. My question is, if you're going to look at the SDGs versus impact investment and social investment and all those topics, I work in the philanthropy world, I know about the impact investment space, and I'm really interested in it. But I'm also interested in how many big companies are going to pay attention to the internal evaluation they need to do, because you can't have big corporates doing, oh, our ESG does this, oh, our social impact is that, our impact investment is this. I'm like, yeah, but you're killing people over there. Their internal evaluations are so important, how they audit themselves. So how quickly do you think the big corporates are going to pay attention to that, or are they going to get so lost in impact investment that that will be the next rush of realization that comes to fruition?
Who would like to have a go?
I think this generation will be the filter, because I think if corporations and large companies don't take notice and don't look internally, they're not going to survive. I mean, they're not. It's its own filter. And there's another generation coming up after that that's going to be even more discerning. So, you know, it's smart business is look at what you're doing. Make sure that what you're doing engages and fits into that generation's discerning demands.
I think also it's generational within companies as well. I have so many friends who are now, 6-7 years out of university, who have gone to work for corporations, and 90% of them have left if they don't feel they're making an impact. And so that's a resources drain that huge corporations can't sustain. So they're going to have to change their culture to keep talented people working with them.
Just to build on that question for you, Hans, because when you were telling the story of the initiative, right, you mentioned the drive from the top, the fact that one of the CEO was asked the right questions in some ways. Can you tell us a bit and perhaps end on that positive note, perhaps how did that culture and those values diffuse through the organization once the decision was taken to go ahead with the development?
Yeah, I mean, in a big organization, like with 130,000 employees, there's always these kind of, resource allocation decisions and, where do you put your priorities? But when you get that message from the top, loud and clear, when we were in a situation that this drug was suddenly needed by dozens of countries, and so we couldn't follow demand, and, this plant in China, this sweet wormwood, simply needs 9 months to really grow and before you can harvest it. So the company then said, we need to kind of increase the supply chain capacity, the manufacturing capacity, and it has to go fast, and it has to go actually twice as fast as normally is possible in the industry. And then you see indeed that senior leadership that basically says, and this is what we must do, and that rallies the entire organization behind it. So very powerful. And I recall that story that, we were publicly nailed by the NGOs, by Doctors Without Borders and Oxfam, etc., for allegedly not investing enough to increase the capacity of this malaria drug, because, you know, the company wouldn't make money out of it, and so we were choosing to let children in Africa die. And so, no, we said, we do the right thing, even though, you know, we can't shoulder the whole burden of this disease globally on our own shoulders, but we will do what we can. And I remember this manufacturing capacity was installed right before, it was in the US, right before the Thanksgiving week started. So the question was, what are we going to do? So we said, okay, we'll put up a paper in the canteen in the manufacturing facility in the US, asking for people to put their name as volunteers, and basically then to work throughout the Thanksgiving break. And within hours, that paper was filled, because people realize, you know, this is something that's important. Our CEO is putting his weight behind this. And people said, you know, I can't be eating turkey if I know that people, children are dying in Africa from a disease that we have the solution for. So yes, I think all in all, the right message from the top makes or breaks things.
Great, thank you, Hans. Ladies and gents, we've been discussing an issue that is large, that is huge, that is challenging, and I'm sure we could still spend hours drawing on the wealth and experience of our guests, but please join me in thanking them for being here with us tonight and sharing all of their experience. Thank you very much, gentlemen.